So if you've seen part 1 to 4, you're gonna know that we got the engine out, we got the gas tank out, and this boat is pretty much ready to go to get flipped over. So to get ready for getting this boat flipped over, I'm just gonna go through and clean up anything that's laying around in there and secure anything that's gonna fall. Once this boat's flipped over and we pull off the bottom, which will be this part, you'll see all of this stuff kind of laying in there. And I just want to make sure that none of this is going to get caught up in the rolling frame that we have it on. That way we can still kind of move everything around and not have to worry about, for example, like this shift bar getting stuck. So I'm just going to do that now and get that all tidied up, and yeah. So if you remember in the last video, this flange goes directly up to the engine. And then from that flange, you can see that shaft right there will go through this area down here, and then it'll come out through the bottom, and that's where your prop and the prop shaft are. So I'll show you guys how to get this all apart. I did want to mention a couple of things that I just noticed on this particular one. I don't know if you can spot two kind of issues as to where it would be leaking from, but I'll just quickly show you here. And again, how this seals is there's a seal here between the brass and the wood that stops water from getting in. So you'll have water in this cavity, it'll come up to here, it'll go up to this part, and then there is a rope seal down inside there to prevent the water from coming out the end. I'm sure you've already noticed this is really bad. Absolutely water would have been pouring out of this at some point. You should keep an eye on these if you're noticing water coming out, just in an attempt to keep it fresh and make sure that you don't have any deterioration. And then the other thing that I noticed that's quite a lot more concerning, it appears that the brass is cracked here. And in an attempt to fix it, they have put a couple of random pieces of hardware down here instead of the conventional style that was in here before. So that just kind of shows me that they were just frantically trying to seal this area up and prevent this leak. And I can actually see right here too that someone has put additional adhesives here. Even if there wasn't a hole in the bottom of this boat, this is why you check boats that you get, because I don't know if you remember, there was pieces of wood here, and then you had your rear seat, and you had the interior on top of that. So if you put this boat in the water, you're going to start to notice a whole bunch of water will start filling up in the bottom in the bilge area, and you won't be entirely sure where it's coming from. The tricky part is that it could either be coming from here, it could be coming from the rudder shaft right here. It's not really super easy to identify without going out of your way and pulling all this stuff up. You don't necessarily need to take the engine out per se, but at the very least pulling out the interior and the floorboards and just kind of getting an eye on what's going on here, because from the outside I wouldn't be able to spot that. I'd only be able to find that, again, if I was doing some disassembly. To start, we're going to go from here, disassembling all of this until we just have the prop shaft, and then I'll show you what to do next there. So to start off, you're going to want to rotate this until you find the little locking bolt. So it can either be this style, or you'll have an indented one that'll actually go into the flange. Most of the time on the old boats, it's just this external little square drive piece. So once that's loose, we can just remove it for the time being and put it somewhere safe. And then this flange should just slide off of the prop shaft. You may have to convince it a little bit with a soft face hammer or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So what you'll find in this flange is there's going to be these little square pieces here. This will be able to apply twisting force to this. If you don't have these little pins installed when you put this flange on and you tighten this down, there's a very high chance this will fail and this will just start spinning on the prop shaft and you're not going to go anywhere. And then it's time to bring out the paddles. But really, this is all that's kind of holding that all together, and they just kind of slip into here just like that, and away you go. Now once this is all disassembled, surprisingly enough, for most of the time, you can just pull the shaft right on out of here. So we're going to go down below and see if we can get that out now. So yes, this will come out However, I made the silly mistake of forgetting to remove the rudder. So let's let's remove the rudder now, and then we'll come back to getting this out. So here's the rudder shaft assembly. This will be the steering arm going to this little pivot point, and then that'll be the actual shaft for the rudder. And then as well, there'll also be another rope seal housing right there to stop water from getting in. It's relatively similar to the prop shaft. You have a seal along this flange, and then you have that rope seal to prevent the water from getting in. And then steering is just as simple as turning that side to side. So let's get that apart now. Now how these come apart is this bolt is actually threaded into this brass piece. And then on the other side of the brass piece, there'll be another nut as a locking nut. So if you're ever at the point where you're turning this and all of a sudden it gets super tight, and you go back and it's loose again, that's what's going on. There is a locking nut kind of hiding from the back there. And the reason they put that on there is because when this is moving back and forth, that would eventually loosen. So they have to put that on as a safety measure. Now for this particular version, what we're going to do next is remove the locking bolt on here. It appears that this one has broken off at some point in time, so that might be a little bit of a battle getting it off, but once that's out, this can come up, and then we'll pull out this roll pin and slide that shaft right out of there. So to get that off, we did have to drill it, which is fine because we can tap and install a new bolt so long as it has a tapered end to it and it can fit into this little recess. We should be totally fine on that. And then again, make sure that you're not losing this tiny little key, because there'll be another one on here as well. But what we're going to do next is pull this off, and then the rudder will pop out from the bottom. So out comes the rudder, and then the prop shaft can come out as well. Now, due to the fact that we are taking the bottom off of this boat, we're going to actually go ahead and remove that piece, as well as the bolts for this, and also the retaining bolts for that little opening for the prop shaft, and anything else along the bottom. And the reason for that is once we go to take this wood off, if there's a bolt holding this wood plank to the actual bottom of this boat, it's going to be really difficult to remove. So we're going to go ahead and preemptively remove anything connecting the bottom of the boat to the framing on the inside. So once the nuts are undone and you tap the bolts straight down through the little carriage bolts, you can now remove this piece. And now what's going on here is that the shaft for this part actually goes down through the bottom. So you may have to just kind of wiggle it back and forth and slowly get this piece out. So now this has been removed, you can kind of get a better viewpoint of what's going on. Now I can tell that this has never been taken off of here since factory, due to the fact that there's actually a fabric. Now, back in the day, they used to take cotton or a material like that, and that's how they would seal everything. You're gonna find pieces of cotton that seal up those areas. Now, obviously, as time goes on, these deteriorate, and they simply don't hold back the water like they used to. But the idea is that they fill up with water and become a seal. So whenever you remove these, it's best to use the modern method of resealing, which would be cleaning all of this up and applying 5200 to this area, as well as to here and around the head of the bolt from the bottom. That way you know that this is sealed and it's not going to leak. It'll also kind of hold this down in place. But yeah, just kind of a cool little thing there. So now I'm just going to be taking out the fasteners holding this plate down, and we'll see what's looking like underneath. Now, of course, to fully remove this out, you will have to either remove this completely or do as I did and just remove a couple of the bolts so you can actually get it out. It will just be two more of these carriage bolts running through here. I will just mention briefly too, the hardware that comes off of these, you want to be really careful you're not throwing these away or unnecessarily damaging some of this hardware. I did notice that a couple of the pieces are busted just sitting in here. Take this screw for example. Obtaining a brass flat bottom, round top, flat head is next to impossible. We've attempted to obtain this exact particular screw before in the past. and nobody is making this screw anymore. So obtaining new ones is quite difficult. If you are doing restoration where you want every screw to be the correct one, make sure you hang on to these and put them somewhere safe, because again, you're not going to find these. There's other options. Of course, you know, I've seen somebody else has put in a taper bottom, flat top. There is other options, but as for this particular one, these don't exist. So just something to keep in mind when you're removing the hardware, just to be extra vigilant to make sure you hang on to it. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure what happened to this flange in the past, but this is some of the hardware that I've been removing from it. You can see some of the differences there. I don't know if it's deteriorated in the wood, possibly, or if somebody has just put these in arbitrarily. In fact, I even found this one right here. I'm assuming this one's broken off somewhere in the wood here. If it was leaking, it's going to have created some quite soft wood, which will lead to issues with screws being held down. But just taking a look underneath here. So when we go to reinstall this, just like the rudder flange, we're going to clean this off, clean off the bottom here. We may have to take a look at the integrity of the wood, and then we will be putting 5200 marine adhesive on there. It's a bonding adhesive and a sealant. But taking a look in here, I noticed this. This is what can happen if the prop shaft is misaligned. So you can see that prop shaft has been running at the wrong angle for quite some time, and it has actually worn away the majority of this edge right here. Obviously that's not ideal, that's not something you want, and that can come from a number of things. That can be the engine being in the wrong position in relation to these mounts. That could be this flange wasn't put on in the right spot, or even that little tail shaft piece that holds the end of the prop shaft up. If that's not lined up properly, you could also have issues like that. You can see the brass has just kind of slowly been getting eaten away there. Let's just take a look here. That little mound. Yeah, that's all sealant. In fact, this isn't even cured because of how much sealant they put in. They could have put it into the water preemptively. This is why it really matters what you're using. Just wanted to show you guys again. I think this is a really cool piece of history in here. You take this off, you can actually see that cotton seal that I was telling you about. And this one's actually in pretty good condition. Let's carefully pull that out of there. But again, this is all that they would use back in the old days to seal up these boats. That's why they're called soak bottoms, is because you do have to keep the boat somewhat submerged in water for this cotton to become a sealant. If it's just dry like this, it's not going to seal anything. So it has to stay in the water for the wood to expand and press up against it, and for this to soak in some water. And then once that happens, it will begin to seal, and you won't have any water coming in from the bottom. But there will be water coming in for quite some time, maybe about a week or at the most if the boat is sitting in water. But with the modern design that we're going to do, we're just going to be using marine plywood and then 5200 as well. So there we are, guys. We got all the flanges pulled out. We got the bolts taken out for that prop shaft support. We got this piece taken out, as well as any of the drains or water intake holes. So we should be good to go. I'm just going to fasten down anything loose and get ready to bring it over to the gantry. So here we are at the gantry. We have the boat ready to go. We did have to put the lift rings back on, and I'll show you guys why in a second here. But the plan is we're going to pick it up and then put the straps around it, and we'll be able to flip it over. We're actually going to be taking the trailer out as well and putting our little cradle underneath it. So first of all, we're going to get it up in the air just a little bit so it's hovering off of the trailer. And then once it's free and clear, we'll be able to pull the trailer out and start putting the straps up around the boat. So we now have the two straps running parallel there, and we're going to lift the boat up. And the reason for that is, as Jim was explaining, once the boat is tilting, that width is going to turn into height, so you want to make sure that you're going to clear the ground underneath. So the next step is we're going to tighten these yellow straps down, and once they're tight, we can take the tension off of here and begin flipping it, but we're going to have to pull the trailer out as well. So now we have the boat hovering here. We've pulled the trailer out. You can see it's just floating above the ground. And we have the locks on this side. And the reason for that is we're going to be spinning the boat and turning it this direction. So we want to make sure that those are far enough out of the way. They're not going to cause any damage to the boat as it's spinning. So there we go, we got the boat flipped over. It's now sitting comfortably on this cradle, so we can move it around and start working on the bottom of it. And this bottom is pretty bad. Lots of disarray. They raked out what was in there before, and there doesn't appear to be any caulking inside of where there should be. It's just on the top. And on top of that, if you take a look at the planking, you can see kind of around that spot right there, this plank is actually raised. So right around here, there's actually quite a big difference in height. They should all be flat in the same level. But the funny part is that they've actually put the silicone in at an angle in that spot. This should be completely flat here. We also appear to have a fiberglass patch in this area. You can see the bumping and indentation, as well as along here you can also see more fiberglass running along this part of the boat, and you can see that by the little bubbles and indentation patterns there. Now right here is the spot. The reason that we flipped this over to begin with, I mean, I'm going to be quite honest, we would have flipped this over anyways just due to how terrible this bottom is, but this is where that indentation was. So if you take a look, you can see the cracking running along here. Might have taken the hit in this area, and it looks like someone has just wiped silicone on with something. But you can see this plank here is going in, and then right here it's actually sticking out. So there's a lot of warping on this planking, and that's all just due to the fact that the seams have been slowly seeping water into them and distorting the shape of the wood over some time. Looks like we found some more fiberglass patching right here, and Christine just pointed out this spot. Here's a spot where you can really see the distortion of the wood. So if you just follow along, see how far up this is sticking compared to where we first started there. And that's, unfortunately, that's all over this entire bottom. Now, these boats, you can replace the bottoms on them as many times as you'd like, as long as it's done properly, and you shouldn't have an issue with it. So we're really excited to put some plywood on here.
All right, this is called a Forstner bit, 3/8. See a screw head here, so you want to get a little awl, dig it out. Get a Robertson. So each screw has to be taken out, planks come off, plywood on.
And so you'll have like a row of screws here, you're gonna have another row of screws here, all the ways along.
Ta-da!
So the crew pointed out that these are Robertson brass screws. Being that they're Robertson, that's a Canadian screw type, and this is an American boat, which leads us to believe that at some point the bottom has been done on this. We're not sure how many times or when, but at one point in its life the bottom has been redone. So essentially now we have to play the very tedious game of removing each and every one of these screws so we can then take the planking and take them off. One thing I am pretty grateful for on this is that the planks are relatively intact, which is quite nice because that actually gives us our dimensions, our shapes, our angles for roughly where we want that plywood to be. Now when we do the plywood bottom, what we're going to do is this one, this plank, and this plank, we're going to take those off, and then this right here is a solid piece of wood that actually goes up into the inside. You can see that right here. That's where that prop shaft comes through. So this is one solid piece of wood. So there'll actually be 4 pieces of plywood. So you're going to have one here, and then coming up to about this point, because they do come in 4x8 sheets, roughly around here it'll transition into the next set of plywood. And whether we do stripping of plywood like this or this is essentially up to the plywood. If it can make this curve, if it can make this bend, we don't have to cut it up too much, but again, that really depends on the type of plywood we're using. Now you may be asking yourself why we're putting plywood on here. How is that safe for the boat? So we actually use a very special type of plywood specifically for working on these boats. You shouldn't use regular run-of-the-mill plywood for this. It's going to cause big problems. It's not going to work. You need to use the special plywood for it. And I'll just show you guys what I'm talking about. So this piece of plywood is essentially what we would be using. It is made by this brand Marine Ply Dragon. And what makes this stuff special is that it's been specially formatted to bend as well as hold back water. It's designed specifically for marine applications. And they're so confident with their plywood that they send. There is a form of insurance where if the plywood fails for whatever reason, this company will compensate for the damage. So again, we're not talking about your conventional plywood such as this. Don't use this on the bottom of a boat. Make sure you're using the special graded marine plywood. That way you're not going to have any problems in the future. It'll curve quite nice too to whatever curves you need it to go to. And it doesn't typically fracture like a regular piece of plywood would. Moving back onto the bottom of this boat, what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these, it's a scraping unit, and we just drag it along the top like this, and it'll reveal exactly where we have to drill to get the wood out and remove the screws. I'm going to take out this panel just to show you guys the makeup of the construction, and we'll go from there. So to give you guys an idea, that's how many screws roughly were in this piece. And then if we take a look underneath it, see if we can wiggle this out of here. There we go. So this is what we're going to be working with on the underside of it. And this is going to be those battens that you can see from the inside. So we'll get this all cleaned up, make sure it's all nice and sealed, and basically what we're going to be doing is slowly taking off all of these pieces, making sure we keep them in order, and then we'll be cleaning the surface of this, getting it nice and fair, and setting up to put the plywood down. So it's not going to be a huge process. Really, most of the work is going to be fairly tedious. The exuberant amounts of work we've done has been just kind of dismantling the inside of the boat. So this part is actually going to be quite enjoyable, just taking our time and slowly taking this apart piece by piece and making sure that we get everything disassembled properly and keeping our reference. So that's going to do it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really excited. We got to start working on the bottom part of the boat now and showing you guys what the woodworking looks like. Up to this point, it's essentially just been mechanical work and disassembly, which is fairly straightforward, but I'm really excited to start sharing some more of the technical information here. And of course, in the next video, we're going to be removing this whole bottom side and really getting a look at what's going on underneath the planking. So thank you guys for your support, and I hope to catch you next time. Peace.